How do you respond to an inappropriate accidental touch by someone at work? I'm going to answer this from a unique perspective. First question, was it actually accidental? You can tell the difference by if the person recoils upon touching you or if they explore more. It's a very obvious tactile difference. This is especially true in blind and deaf-blind circles, where some blind or deaf-blind creeps think they can use their blindness as an excuse. Nope. The difference between touch and recoil versus touch and explore/grope is unmistakable. Every blind person has had an accident at one time or another. Appropriate blind people, as soon as they realize what they're touching, and that it's a private area, will immediately draw their hand back and will usually react with embarrassment and apologize. For example, one time I was sitting using tactile ASL interpreters in class. We were seated and my interpreter was seated to my right. Class was wrapping up and I didn't realize my interpreter had already stood up when I went to reach for his hand to ask something, so I ended up actually touching his crotch. I immediately recoiled, felt terrible, apologized profusely, we laughed it off, and moved on. Inappropriate blind people touch, and then their hand keeps moving, and exploring more, even though they know exactly what they're touching. That is just as inappropriate as a handsy-sighted person. There's no recoil, there's no embarrassment, there's no apology, or the apology is obviously delayed and fake, after they've gotten in a good grope. There is often also an obvious ignoring of other cues. For example, I used to have a hearing blind coworker who would ignore every audio cue indicating where I was standing, such as the location of my voice and footsteps, and would quote-unquote accidentally run into me. In every other context, his sound location skills were excellent, yet he would run into me over and over. That's the other cue, if it happens repeatedly. Sighted folks, this is the oldest, tiredest excuse in the blind community. Don't fall for it. With sighted people, I can also tell when someone is touching me by accident versus when they are touching me on purpose. There is a different feel in their hand, the way the muscles in their hand move, how their hand travels and contours my body. Plus, to touch a private area, there really has to be an intentional reach. There's really no way you accidentally touch someone's crotch or chest when you can see to avoid the area. Now there are times when it is truly accidental. For example, in deaf-blind culture, there is something called protactile, where you convey emotion, expression, grammar, and spatial meaning by drawing on the person's body instead of in midair as with visual signing. One time I was standing face-to-face with a deaf-blind client, and he was using protactile to confirm the route to the bathroom. Because we were standing face-to-face, the easiest place to map was on the front part of my shoulder. Part of his map got a bit close to my chest. He obviously noticed the change from bonier musculature to softer tissue. As soon as he realized, he felt terrible and apologized, because he was genuinely just trying to communicate, and he was very apologetic and said he hoped he didn't make me uncomfortable. I knew nothing was meant by it. Again, there is a different feel in the hands. He was obviously focused on drawing the route and wasn't trying to squeeze in a grope. I generally don't like to touch or be touched by hearing-sighted coworkers, accidental or not. The only time I make contact with hearing-sighted coworkers is if they want to show me something, like a new haircut, or if I need to take human guide. That means a blind person holding onto another person's elbow to be guided in an unfamiliar, noisy, or crowded environment. I've had some coworkers and supervisors put their hand on my shoulder though, for purely non-linguistic reasons, and it feels patronizing and condescending to me. The people who do this always seem to do it from behind as well, which feels even more like a power play. Accidental or not, I don't like it and I ask them not to touch me. Have you ever faced a life in prison? When I was in high school and the few years after, my primary source of income was dealing. One day I was just hanging out at home with my girlfriend. We went to the Circle K a few houses down and got some beer. The clerk, who I knew pretty well at this point, asked if he knew where I could get a dub sack. I said sure and that I'd be back soon. I go home and forget about it. An hour or two later I'm like, oh crap, remember, weigh it out and go back. He had already given me the money, very important detail for later, so I waited until he had no customers. He came out and we went around the ice box, just smoking and chatting. I handed him the bag. Now, there was no one around. Empty lot except for this beat-up Volvo facing the record store next door. If I had been paying better attention, I may have noticed this Volvo had completely tinted windows, which seemed odd to do on a beat-up Volvo. Two men get out of the car and approach us. One tall skinny guy wearing 100% denim and another guy who looks like Dog the Bounty Hunter in a beige sweater. They approach us and ask how we're doing. Me and clerk look at each other like, you know these guys? Then all of a sudden, the flash badges and yell EPD, you're under arrest. And cuff us, separate us, and search us. Beige dog goes through my texts, finds a couple dubious ones, a few crumpled up 20s, starts trying to get me to admit to doing a lot of business today blah blah. Then they surprise me by walking me and my girlfriend back to my porch, saying they've seen me come and go quite a bit and just want to make sure you don't have a pound of dope in there and they'll just charge me with a misdemeanor. Otherwise, it will be jail and a felony. So here we are, on my front porch, me saying there's no way I will let them in my house and to call my lawyer over and over. At one point, my roommate walks out, says hi, gets in his car and leaves. At this point, Dog explains that if I don't let him search the house, he's going to park a few squad cars on the lawn, extract everyone from the house and wait on a warrant, and they will charge everyone in the house with every little thing they find in any room. I now know this is not legal. Then, I was just scared. My roommate that had just left was a total nerd with a great job. Straight edge, rarely drank and never smoked or anything at all. I was terrified of him losing his job. Unfortunately for me, I had just had an opportunity to get mushrooms at a steal of a deal. My area was super dried up on mushrooms at the time, so I asked around and basically had all my deals set before I got it. This timing was perfect, because just 30 feet away on the coffee table of my bedroom was quarter pound of mushrooms, neatly weighted out. Top that with all the grass in there. It wasn't looking pretty, so I proposed that I let one of them in to search just my bedroom and be done with it. I knew once I let them in they could do whatever, but I was out of options. Beige dog agrees. Canadian Tuck stays with my girlfriend and dog the sweater hunter enters with me. I lead him upstairs, and walk right past my door, which thank God was closed, and into the straight edge guy's room. Dog completely turns it over, takes out drawers, turns the mattress over, the whole thing. As he does this, I quietly turn off the computer monitor with a background of my roommate and his girlfriend glaring on it. Guy finds nothing, sticks with his agreement and walks me and my grin back downstairs. My girlfriend, probably assuming I'm going to prison for many years, is looking like she's about to dissolve, but I'm just grinning. Guy still charged me with a felony. Then they leave. Long story short, paid a lot for a great attorney who was friends with the prosecutor. Since no money was seen to be exchanged, the charge was knocked down to deliverance of grass. The prosecutor recommended the minimum sentence. I paid in $121 fine, did 80 hours of community center at a local music venue, saw a ton of shows for free and retired from dealing. Who is the most disturbing man that you personally know and how did you get back at him? My uncles were gang affiliated and my eldest uncle was an amazing tattoo artist. My dad wasn't a gang member but was well known in our city for participating in gang activity but never jumped in. One of my uncles threw a party for his daughter's birthday. Practically anyone who wanted in the party was allowed to join in. Myself, my brothers and mother weren't at the party as it was also my mother's sister's birthday and we enjoyed being around her more. But my sisters went with my dad as they were close to my uncle's daughter. My sister was left alone sleeping in my cousin's room since our parties always ended up going until the next morning. The door to my cousin's room did not have a lock. As my 13-year-old sister was sleeping she felt someone on her. As she woke up she realized it was a boyfriend of one of our older cousins. He was 19 at the time. Nothing was known beyond that until a month later when my sister had finally told my mom. Brave of her since she was only 13. Many people at that age keep quiet for years. By then everyone in my dad's part of the family became aware of this, including my older cousin, the one with the creepy boyfriend. She was heartbroken but agreed on something with her dad. She set up her then boyfriend into meeting up with her at a local park. My dad along with my uncles and a few members waited at the park at around 9 p.m. It was a very lonely, barely lit, quiet park. A friend of my uncle known as Sonny had a small RV in which they waited in. The piece of crap arrived at the park. That's when my dad and the rest ran up to him and started laying blows on him until they dragged him into the RV. They arrived at my uncle's place, the one who did tattoos. Once they arrived they took him inside where my uncle was ready with all his equipment and gave him some new artwork all over his face, neck, head and hands. All over he had writing indicating that he had forced himself onto my sister, including an extremely big tattoo across his forehead all the way to the right side of his head that said 13-year-olds, and then added a love heart after. They waited until he woke back up. Now around 2 a.m. they dumped him in front of his father's house, not to be discovered by neighbors until the sun came out. My father left a heavy well-written note on the door of the piece of crap's dad house. This led to his dad kicking him out of his house. Surprisingly one of his friends let him stay with him for a while until a month after the incident. Two of his friends were found guilty on a charge regarding taking someone's life. Apparently it happened around 3 months before this whole incident. He was sent to prison where he had his life taken by fellow prisoners in a brutal way. They set his room on fire.